On behalf of Mrs. Jacks and David Tronnes, Richard Zaleski, and I want to thank you very much for your careful attention up to this point. It's been evident that since the jury selection process going back to last Wednesday that you all have given the trial the attention that it deserves. You carefully participated in the jury selection process, allowing us to pry somewhat into your thoughts and beliefs in your lives in order to be able to qualify you as jurors for this case. And you're qualified for jurors in this case because you agreed to hold some basic principles in the criminal justice system to be true. And we started off early on in the process by talking about the presumption of innocence. And a defendant, as they say in the trial, at the beginning of the trial, is cloaked in a shroud of innocence, just like anybody else in the room. They stand accused by the government, but they are innocent until proven guilty. Right? And we talked about the burden of proof sits over here with the government. We talked about the fact that this is not a civil trial. We're not talking about a preponderance of the evidence. This is not a 51-49 tip the scales and the government wins the day. Their burden is a very high burden. It's beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. The definition we'll go over in just a little bit, but when you talk about the fact that the burden of proof is beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, it isn't in the title of the charge. It goes to the elements of each offense, and those are broken down for you in the law of judgment give you. But each element of the offense has to be proven beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt in order for you to sustain a guilty plea. And we'll go over the elements, but if they fall short on one element, the whole thing fails. That's how it works. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to check all of the boxes. And when we're talking about this case, the box that's in question, you talk about, forget about Shante Cooper, stipulate your identity, you got photographs, there's plenty of evidence that Shante Cooper is dead. I think there's ample evidence to suggest that this was a violent encounter, whether it was a violent fall or a violent attack. There's no direct evidence as to what happened in the apartment that day. This is a circumstantial case. So the third principle that we talked about in the criminal trial, and you all pledged to adopt it, even if it wasn't natural to normal life or everyday life, was the fact that two sides to every story and all that kind of stuff is left at the door. That a defendant has the absolute right to remain silent. It begins at arrest with Miranda. You all have heard on the TV shows over the course of the year. And you come to learn that it continues through the course of the trial. Up until the point that the case is over. Having pled not guilty, the burden still sits here with the government. And unless they have been determined to have proven the elements beyond a reasonable doubt, the verdict has to be not guilty. Just like the jury selection, because you haven't seen no evidence, if you were asked to come up with a verdict, no one would do about the charge, you would have had to have been not guilty. And just like in close of openings, because just like closing arguments, opening statements, are not evidence. And I hope you take care of those who look like you were, because Mr. Smith stood up at the beginning of this trial and he gave you a list of promises. He told you a story, it was very dramatic at times, and he told you, he pledged to you that through the evidence, the testimony to stand and the exhibits, that he was going to deliver on those promises and prove these things to you. And we'll go through those in just a few, but as we speak, there's almost 100 pieces of evidence back here, hours of an interview. Our memory is not gospel. You are to rely upon your own memories. The judge will tell you that you've got notes, you've got the opportunity to review the evidence, carefully review it, and re-review it if you care to make sure you got it right, because there's a lot of information being thrown at you. Maybe you didn't even understand the significance at the time, but that's the point of this process, for us to highlight some of these things for you. And it's also the point of the deliberations, so that you go back into the room and you bring your ideas together collectively to share.
This is not follow the leader. You are not sheep. You have a vote, and you should have an individual voice. You pledge that as well. The other thing you pledge is that you would hold the government to their burden. That you're not here to play detective. You're not here to solve a crime. You're here to determine if the government has proven the crime that they have alleged and the elements of that crime. And specifically, that Shante Cooper Tronnes was murdered, and David Tronnes is the person that did it. And did they prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is the person that committed this offense? Submit to you they did not. At the beginning of the trial, the state sold you hard a financial motive. Shanti's the only source of the income. She's the breadwinner. He does nothing other than take care of the pool and the dogs. Well, you know through the evidence that promise was broken by the state. They sold hard an unhappy marriage and frustration and tension due to this construction project, the time and the scope of it. So you've got a financial motive, you've got this frustration because of the house renovation, and it's a boiling pot, right? Because they have now been relegated from the main house to this 800 square foot apartment, and it has turned into such a problem that it led to murder. That's what the government would have you to believe. Those were their promises. There were arguments about Shanti not having ownership. There was absolutely no evidence presented to you about that. There was none. Where was the argument about her being added on the ownership? And David's explanation in the course of the interview, go back and listen to it. Because it was a contentious divorce. She did not like James Cooper. She did not like him at all. In fact, she changed the beneficiary on the insurance to David, and she changed, all of it because she didn't want any money to go to James Cooper. That's what David's explaining to you, that structuring the trust took care, and it was trying to figure it out because they didn't want to leave everything to Jackson because they didn't want James having control over it. So we're trying to figure out a way to structure it so that was possible. That was the delay. That was the explanation. They would have you believe that this was an unhappy marriage, that they slept in separate beds and they slept in separate rooms, in separate buildings, and they lived separate lives. That the marriage was crumbling just a few years in. Well, we know through the witnesses and the testimony that those promises were broken as well. They bickered like a married couple was the testimony, but quickly made up. There was no tension about the house. In fact, you hear through the testimony that the house was turning a corner. By 16 months that they were living in this apartment, there were accommodations made. Why? Because it's a small space. It's 800 square foot. You've got an 8-year-old boy sleeping in a room with 2 adults, one of which is not their biological parent, and one of whom snores like a trucker and is not compliant with their CPAP machine, which we know was extremely bothersome to David Tronnes. We know that Jackson and Shanti went to bed really early because Jackson was 8 years old. And we know that David stayed down in the garage on occasion, but not always. They would like you to believe that he was banished to this garage because things were so bad, that he didn't sleep with his wife, he didn't have any relations with her, that this is all nonsense. Well, we know the physical evidence refutes that, right? Because ultimately the sheets that are tested and are supposed to have all of this evidence of this violent, brutal attack on the bed have 2 tiny spots of Shanti's blood. What is most of the blood? A bunch of tiny little spots attributed to David, and another half dozen or so attributed to the son Jackson. 2 of dozens of the stains, 2 were attributed to Shanti. These are the sheets that were supposedly on the bed during the course of this attack, and the course of and they should match up the stains with the mattress pad and the carpet below, and the slats and the wooden rail. Where is the evidence? It's pure supposition, ladies and gentlemen. This is a case about a rush to judgment. It's a case about confirmational bias. It's about a sloppy investigation. It's about circumstantial evidence pure supposition, all steered by Teresa Sprague, who prejudged this case based upon a phone call received from her from an officer at the scene about these crocodile tears. We know she hadn't heard the 911 call, and it's a call, by the way. So to suggest that one's got a mind and to say that these were not real tears being shed on a phone call is pretty special, isn't it? Again, supposition. It's a phone call. Officers show up. They describe him to be, and this is Stephen Wilson, described him to be hysterical in a state of rambling, but insufficient tears. That phone call goes out to Teresa Sprague before she even steps foot on the premises. It goes up into the stairs. She's got an opinion. She's got a belief. And how do we know that? Because before she speaks to David, she walks around the scene. She speaks to Ralph Kalachi. Wilson poisons Sprague. Sprague poisons Kalachi with this idea that this is a domestic violence attack because they've got it all figured out within hours of being at the scene. Before any evidence is processed, no DNA, no prints, no nothing. This is just a hunch, ladies and gentlemen. A hunch. Wade Sperry pronounces her dead, doesn't have a real memory as the condition of the body of the clothes. He wasn't in there that long. But that's all cleared up. And we've got conflicts into the evidence about how these people encountered Shanti's body and how they perceived her hair and her clothing in different states of wetness and dampness and such. It's confusing, isn't it? I mean, the crime scene makes no sense. The state went through the witnesses. These were their witnesses, but it's important that we review much of their testimony because throughout the course of the trial, many of the state's witnesses offered up valuable information to support the defense. We know that CSI Crosby was at the scene, and he was the lead CSI tech. He was working with a young lady in training, CSI Taylor. And so we talk about a sloppy investigation, and this isn't taking pot shots. I mean, we've got Teresa Sprague, who's got tunnel vision. She's a domestic violence superstar who comes in, and this is what confirmational bias is. You have a belief, and one has a belief, and then one goes out and looks at everything shaded in the idea that this supports the belief because of the bias. If you hear horses, if you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras, sort of thing, because that's the point. You don't get to fit a square peg in a round hole because it's convenient. And that's what happened here. With the rush to judgment, with the confirmational bias, those two detectives went into a room with David Tronnes and worked him over. 16 hours at a station he spent. After the slaying of his wife, he shows up at the police department at 5 p.m. on April the 24th. He sits there. What does he do? Voluntarily, by the way, not under arrest, goes down to the station at the request to assist law enforcement with their investigation. Rides with law enforcement, doesn't drive himself, goes to a room. They photograph his body and his clothes, close up of his clothes. They swab his cheek. They swab his hands. They clip his nails. They ultimately take his clothes. The sergeant gives it to him. Fine, have it. Put him in a paper gown. Sit him in a cushionless chair. Give him a bottle of water, a cracker, and then what? Let's just sit and wait alone in a room without windows for 4 hours at this point until the detectives come back in and begin their interview sometime after 9 p.m. on April the 24th. They come in with their techniques. Manipulation is what it is. Good cop, bad cop. Going at somebody, trying to, get them to warm up to you, trying to trick them. They keep him in the room, talking to him till after midnight. They leave again for a couple of hours. He's again alone in the room. They don't know that he's sleeping. He says he sleeps a little bit. Go back and watch the video for yourself. Go through it. You got an unredacted version because that's the good news. Mr. J was just fast forwarding through the majority of the gaps. Those long gaps and not the redactions are still there for you to look at. You can go back through and see exactly what David was doing. The sobbing at times, the crying at times, how often his head was down. How many hours? 16 hours he sat in that room. We had the 3.5 hours. You watched it all. The 3.5 hours to begin with. And then the second portion, right? They come back in sometime after 2 o'clock. And they speak to him until almost 5 a.m. You didn't watch all that because some of it was considered irrelevant for the purposes of the state's presentation, but it's available to you. Go back and look at it. Look at how these detectives treated him for that last hour and a half. Look at it. Because it's important, and we'll go over the law as to why it's important. They left him in the room. Come back in at 2:20. Speak to him to 5 a.m. At this point, it's a lot more aggressive, isn't it? The second half. They come in, the good cop sits aside, Detective McClellan, Sharp, comes in, takes her seat. We know she's in training too. This is her first real homicide that she's been on. And with all due respect, it kind of showed from the stand a little bit. I mean, when Detective Sharp testified, she didn't really have an accurate memory. A lot of it was, I don't recall, this, that. She didn't have anywhere near the memory that Detective Sprague did. It seemed that she was relying upon her and shadowing her throughout the course of investigation. And maybe that's why some of the mistakes were made, right? Maybe, because this is the sloppy investigation. We've got a CSI tech in training in Taylor. We've got Sharp and McClellan in training. And the other two are running through just trying to make sense of this crime scene, 800 square feet. You want to talk about the mistakes and the sloppiness? How about the sheets? Mr. Tronnes is sitting in a room, talking to them. They take note. They find it's very odd that he mentions blood on the bed, sex during menstruation, and the idea that they might be finding some blood, and he wants to be able to tell them that so they can look for it and rule it out as anything significant. The detectives go to the scene, right? They look. They make note of the bed. It looks like it's been made in haste, and it's clean sheets, but it's not made right. The blanket's on one side, this and that. So we've got David's mention of the bed. We've got the detectives noticing the bed. We've got Detective Sprague. She comes to the scene, and through seeing a single diamond stud earring on the nightstand next to the bed, she's come to figure out the whole sequence of events how this attack is happening. Right? She testifies that her theory is that the attack happened 11 o'clock at night. The night before, she's taking off her earring to go to bed. She got one out. She got her head turned. She doesn't see the attacker coming. And this is how it happens. This violent bludgeoning on a bed with no scientific evidence. You want to talk about some droplets of blood that belong to David Tronnes, some droplets of blood that dropped the blood of Jackson Cooper, and a couple of small dots that belong to Shanti, and we're supposed to believe her that this is how it happened? It's not supported by the evidence. Again, it's pure supposition. That is not evidence. It's, again, a hunch. Beyond that, they notice some slats that have fallen off the bed that are underneath the bed. There's no other blood underneath the bed, despite the suggestion and the pictures yesterday from an angle that was somewhat distorted to show, where this cutout was versus where the bed rail was. Let's make it clear here. You're looking
So, just to give perspective, recall how detectives, CSI person encountered her photograph Shanti on the mattress pad adjacent to the bed. You can see the location of the mattress pad, how it's removed from the bed. You can see where the pad is located with respect to the bed railings. Moving that, see the location of the stains, right? So if blood is running down the mattress, if blood is running down the headboard, if blood is running down the inside of that wooden rail and into the metal rail and onto the slats, one would expect blood on the carpet below it. That amount of blood. It's not there. It's not there because that's not how it happened. And the scientists tell you that they can't determine when that blood was deposited there. And on top of that, that blood had a mixture of Shanti and David's blood, which is supportive of period sex. Ultimately, this is the perspective I'd like you to look at. Because those are the cutouts that they took, and they're not under the bed. That's what I'd like you to understand.
CSI Crosby testified that he located and photographed a soaking wet or a wet towel with blood on it underneath the mattress pad. We'll talk about how the carpet is wet and the clothes are wet and how we get wet and it's diluted or that from somebody trying to wash the carpet. Well, we've got an explanation, David, that when pulling Shanti out and trying to care to her, that she's wet, she's cold, he puts her on a towel, she's bleeding, so he retrieves a bright colored towel to wipe blood from her while he's waiting for paramedics and 911. They cry nonsense, but the towel is there and it's got her blood, consistent with being cared to, and the towel is wet. CSI Crosby testified and contradicted Detective Sprague, but when he was there and he encountered the locks were unlocked, both doors were unlocked, and he documented that the door downstairs was unlocked, the top lock to the deck was unlocked. Check your notes, rely upon your memory of the testimony, and see that he was there before Detective Sprague. On the 24th of April, sloppy investigation, they come to a home where the main home is a construction site. And you'll see some of the photographs and you'll look at a video, you can see what the state of the home was. At the very least, on the video we'll watch on April the 18th in just a second. You can cue that up. So, thank you. But the point is, they didn't look at it. They didn't consider it. Detectives show up at a murder, suspected murder, on the 24th, and they don't survey the main home. No fingerprints, no looking for forced entry, no DNA. They don't go inside the premises. They don't look for weapons. They don't pay attention to the fact that there's a ladder leading up to a latch, which allows one to walk, because you heard from Samantha Adams, that there's access to the rooftop deck from the main house. So with the multiple points of access, they completely disregarded one. Why? Why? They walked around, they searched the landscaping, they searched the dumpsters, they look, around the property, they look on the roof. They don't find a weapon. They don't find bloody clothes. They don't find cleaning supplies, no bloody rags, no nothing that looks like that there's been a scene cleaned up. That's it. Go ahead and take a look at the state of the home.
If you want it bigger, you're going to have to shut off the overhead.
Yes, sir.
Hi, family. What's that?
My dad is somebody who knows job. Hi, Dad.
Love you so much, man.
Mommy, I can ready. Love you, boy. Mom.
Love you guys so much.
Are you recording me?
Yes. What would you like to say? Yeah.
Have a good day, guys. And I was recording.
Love you. Oh, shucks. Have a good night, man, okay? Guarantee we'll talk to everybody we need to talk to. We'll do whatever we can do, okay? Like we always do. Okay, now come on. Come on, baby girl. That's a girl. That's my girl. That's a girl, sweetheart. Okay, you guys ready? There we go. Good boy, Charlie. Just gonna go, let's see what we're gonna say. We're gonna go out here where Jackson is waiting for Jim. And we're gonna take a quick look at the pivot game. Here we're gonna have more frost damage, so we knew. There's the cactus. Yeah, there's some near fronts, maybe. Oh, there's a near front in the middle. This is really slow coming out. You can see it right at the top. There it is. I never lost you pick of me. And there's the Rubilia, which is all loading. Hey, Jen. Thank you. All right. And here's the breezeway. Here is the house with the center supports and the first set of trusses out. And that's the stairway opening. That was the one side. Okay, and two doors on this side, one goes to the garage, and the other one goes upstairs, and that's basically the apartment, which I guess I can actually go all the way up here and show you. You go up the stairs, we have three windows on the side. And it's just like full open. It's about 800 square feet at the top of the stairs. And there's a roll down as well, back in the corner. And we're just letting a lot of light. Also a lot of heat, of course. And then we got the door here that goes to the rooftop deck, which is above the family room. So, alright, and we got it all. And here's Charlie and Molly. Nice sweethearts. Good boy, good girl. That a boy, that a girl. Charlie has his frisbee, and Dolly is looking for hers. Love you guys. See you soon.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can see from that video that April of 2018 was a happy time in the Tronnes household. You can see the beautiful home, the beautiful property. You can see the loving interaction with Jackson and David. And you can see the state of the home, can't you? Through the windows, you can see that there's been significant progress. This is no longer an empty shell. You can see, and we know through the testimony, because this is April 18th, right around the time when Keith Ory's looking for the meeting with the Tronneses, that they're going on this TV show, Zombie House Flipping. Things are about to take a turn for the better, for sure. While there have been hiccups throughout the process, Mr. Tronnes, David's acting as his own contractor, clearly got in over his head to the extent of the demolition taking the time that it did and the changing in contractors. We know that there were problems before Keith Ory came on as a consultant. Keith Ory comes on as a consultant, and he's working for several months up to the point where he decides now the condition of the property is worthy of the TV show. But the TV show's a house flipping program. If you've watched the show before, I think the basic model up until the point of the Tronnes home was that the individuals that are on the show owned the properties. They purchased them for a price, and that they would renovate them, fix them up, and flip them, and then they would calculate what your profit is. That wasn't the plan. This was a prototype. This was a new show. This was Zombie House Renovations, because it was a home in zombie-like condition. If that makes sense. But the point is that he thought it was interesting enough for the show and signs them up. They'll get on top of professional care and a production schedule that's clearly going to speed the process up. They're going to be getting Keith Ory and his band of contractors that are renowned locally. They do historic home redevelopments. They have won awards for the home, specifically in Delaney Park. David got a referral through one of the neighbors, and now he had the man to do the job. So on top of the $30,000 in perks or so, it seems that with a May 7th production beginning, that the Tronneses were due to be in a finished home sometime by Labor Day. Where are the dire straits? Where's the tension? Because Keith Ory came over and said that she, was annoyed? Well, what was she annoyed at? Was she annoyed at work? Life on life's terms? Was she annoyed with David? Or was she annoyed with Keith because Keith was giving him a hard time about a fee dispute, even though that he wanted the show? He's like double dipping. He's going to get the show. He's going to get his consultant fee, but now we got to put the project on hold for a couple months. And it was voluntary, and it was worth it. They agreed to it. They wanted the timeout because they wanted this man to take the project over and run it to the finish line. And what did Keith say? They had the means to do it. So all this financial motive, it's hooey. It is. The man bought a house for $600,000 cash. He came down with money. The financial accountant, the financial expert testified, and you can look at his notes. They entered this into evidence. Talk about what Adam Frank testified to, because he certainly didn't get up there and suggest that there was malfeasance or any criminal activity in his forensic accounting work, right? He was given a bunch of bank accounts. He was asked to just review them and come up with the totals and work on a timeline. And you can see, it's pretty clear, David was a man of means before he met Shanti and before he married her. He bought the home before he was married. And when they got together, he deposited and transferred a substantial amount of money into their joint accounts. $284,000 wire, a $100,000 transfer from the trust, a $200,000 deposit at the branch. We've got essentially $584,000 of his money over and above the money that he paid for the house into the joint accounts, over and above the $130,000 in his sole account, over and above the $120,000 in his retirement account, not counting the AXA accounts for his life insurance. Where's the financial incentive? Her $380,000 or a few $100,000 policy? Or not having to share the house with her? What about a divorce? A divorce would accomplish that. Murder to get the house that he bought before he married her? Because she contributed to renovations? Well, he paid $600,000 for a house and she lived there essentially rent-free, note-free for all that time. So wasn't there a benefit there? Who's the freeloader? They want to paint him as he's sucking off her, like all of her money. That all he does is play with the dogs, play with the plants, and exercise and swim in the pool, right? And serve iced tea to her meetings. He's a do-boy, is the picture that they paint for you. That he hasn't worked a real job. Well, he's a man of investments. He invested in a property and he took on the job of general contractor. And that's been his job, ladies and gentlemen. That's been his job. And why all the downtime? Well, because of the delay in production. Now he's got a couple of months. You can see from the video, by the way, I mean, talk about the narrating. He's very proud of the property. I mean, he's proud. He's proud of his family. You can see loving interaction. This is a good day. It's a good time for the Tronneses. That's what that video shows you. Sheets piled up on a banister? That's what the government's taking from it? How the bed is made? Well, what that proves to you is those sheets were purchased beforehand and they existed before the day, so they certainly weren't brought in as part of some cover-up. The bed was made in haste. Shanti was sleeping in it alone on that side of the bed. The blanket was on her side of the bed. Why is that unusual? And if it was so unusual, why didn't you take the darn sheets? Detective Sprague will tell you because she wasn't running the show. She wasn't in charge. The lead detective, deflecting and defensive is long. I mean, we'll talk about weighing the evidence and how people respond to questions and stuff. For the most part, this was pretty clean, right? Throughout the course of the trial, witnesses got up there and with a little bit of hindsight and trying to throw some significance onto some things that were otherwise insignificant, they were straight shooters. Not Teresa Sprague. With all due respect, it was like watching a political debate where it didn't matter what the question was. Someone was going to say the answer they wanted to say. So Shanti had $387,000 in her own account. And that's the motive for this murder? To get rid of her so he can have the house alone? That video shows this was their dream home. This was their forever home. They wanted this. They wanted it for the school district. They wanted it for the family. That was what they were doing. This wasn't all about fleecing a woman to slay her, to take her cash. And if their motive makes no sense, and if you go back to it and if you really look at it and you take all of the evidence, because they've done a lot to prove up this, potential homicide, while the medical examiner says that it is possible that a violent fall, like the magic bullet, right? I mean, it would have to be the perfect fall for somebody to hit the shower in a manner and catch something on the way down, injure the knee, hit a spigot, but falling when you're not supporting yourself in dead weight and landing directly on the ledge, if you were to crush something in the way of the throat, like a karate chop, and then laying prone over the edge of the tub with the head down over the edge onto the bottom of the tub. We heard about this positional asphyxiation. He couldn't rule that out. He couldn't rule it out. He just said he didn't think it was consistent. But he also said he couldn't tell whether it was the blunt force trauma or the asphyxiation ultimately that caused the death. They don't know where it happened. Was it the bed? Was it the bathtub? They don't know how it happened. Was it a towel? Was there a weapon? Nothing was discovered. They don't have that. And why it happened certainly doesn't make sense. But yet you're supposed to believe them as to who it happened? Because it's convenient? And because they've eliminated every other suspect by questioning the homeless man for 6 minutes and he said, I had nothing to do with it. Okay, fine, thank you. They didn't vet the construction companies like they did the list that Keith Ory gave them. Please, what about the people that were fired so that Keith Ory could come in? What about them? What about the men Chonky had an affair with? We didn't hear anything about him. We know that this place is within a mile of proximity to RMC, which is constantly seeing an admission and discharge of mental health patients walking through the neighborhood. There's a homeless problem downtown Orlando. This is right outside downtown. There are parks and lakes all over the place, and the neighbors tipped everyone off that there was a problem. That's why the detective looked into it. She just didn't look into it good enough. Because they had their man, didn't they? Yeah, what are you talking about? Confirmational bias. That's what this is. That'd be the husband. So, we take that belief, and then we take this earring on the nightstand, we take a missed text message at 6 in the morning, we take a man who sleeps sometimes in the garage. Detective Sprague would have you believe that that's where he always slept, and all the stuff about sex and stuff was just nonsense because she believes it was a broken marriage, a marriage on the rocks. Well, what threw that on its head? Because she had to admit that she was wrong, that David was sleeping in that bed, and there is evidence consistent with it because his blood from the sores on his back are all over that bed. More so than Shanti's blood. 2 specks versus how many specks? And we know that his clothes are all upstairs in the closet. We know that no one else suggested that he was banished to the garage. Samantha, Lori, the other friends, no one said anything about that. No one said anything about any angst between them that they thought it rose to the level of concern. No one saw any evidence of abuse, current or past. And that's evident. This was entered into evidence. This is Ralph Kalachi's report. You can read it, but it's got some good language in there. This was at the time. There's no history of domestic violence. And there's never been any law enforcement calls out to the apartment. Please take this back and read it. And the other thing that it has in it, and Detective Sprague didn't know until what? This case, that these reports were written. Well, they are written. And it's documented proof that she poisoned the well because we know that that Investigator Kalachi wrote this report before his shift ended around 10:30 on the 24th. And this was written up before Detective Sprague had an interview completed with David, any conversations with anyone else, no other investigation, and they've got it labeled a domestic violence attack. It's telling. It's telling. That have you believe that this was a slow investigation. He sat there for 16 hours, bared his soul to them, literally and figuratively, told them what he knew, told them what he saw. They asked him to guess. Go back and look at how that all came to be. You've got detectives sitting in a room asking someone to guess. What do you think happened? How do you think this came to be? And because he gives a theory, They married to him like it's gospel. And now they hold him accountable for this as this is his version of events. And they're slaying him because it's inconsistent what they consider the physical evidence to be. And he's not crying enough. Gotta be the husband. They let him go. Let him go. For 127 days, they searched and they did their due diligence, right? Well, no, they just kept going back out to the house to continue search warrant number 2, search warrant number 3. A month later, they're still collecting things, blood. We think we missed the blood. We think we missed the bed. The significance of sheets. Well, it was staring them in the face from minute 1. And what happened on the 24th? At 7 o'clock in the morning, they released David, a free man, and they released the property to him along with all the contents without restrictions. So someone going into this place and touching it, cleaning, moving anything at that point is not evidence of a crime. It's evidence of going into your home and cleaning up this absolute mess that was made by detectives. Executing their search warrant, cutting things up, flipping through things, spraying things down, dusting things down. I mean, so you take your valuables out of the home when you move in with your mothers, so you're concealing evidence? The ring. The ring was never missing. If you listen to the exchange in the interview, David confirms that she has a wedding ring. He talks about something else being said. He certainly doesn't say, I'm positive she was wearing it that day. He doesn't. The mere mention of the ring and the fact that they went out and searched high and low for it, supposedly, is a bit ridiculous because you've got 2 CSI techs who took hundreds of pictures of everything. Some things it was even tough to tell why it was significant, but not only a picture of it, but a close-up of it, another close-up of it, right? But we got bloody slats, we take pictures of them, we go collect them. We know the significance of sheets. We have talked about period sex. We have a hastily made bed. We have a suspicion that the attack happened in the bed. But we don't take the sheets, we don't take the slats, we don't take the bed. But we're supposed to give her the Greeks that she did an ample search and didn't just miss the ring. Well, we know David didn't have it because they stripped him naked. He didn't drive himself there, so it wasn't on him. So it was there. They didn't photograph the drawer. They didn't photograph the ring boxes that day. They didn't photograph the inside of the ring boxes that day. They didn't. So you can't trust that it was done because it's not in evidence, and her testimony is unreliable. A great deal has been made about the lack of movement of Shanti from 11:30 at night and so the significance that her phone did not move from 11:30 till 6 morning. But the attack happened later on in the day. So how do we get to the fact that the phone didn't move from 11:30 at night? Does that fix the time of death? No, because that doesn't work with the timeline we heard from the medical examiner. Probably 24 hours before his exam. So we are talking the morning of the 24th. About 24 hours is mid-morning when David is out walking, and he's seen out walking, by the way. We know slight rigor. We know the blood pooling hadn't started it. It was not fixed. Kalachi was able to pinch, and the blood was still moving. So we know that it's 6 to 8 hours from that 5 p.m. So if you do that math, the window is in that range of like 9 to 12 in the afternoon when he was gone. He was seen by a neighbor, and she didn't see him at 11:50. Go back and look at your notes. Go back and look at the evidence. She checked out at Publix at 11:50, and she saw him on the way to Publix. So it was earlier in the day. So there's a little bit of misstatement as to the sequence there, as to how that came to be. She checked out, actually she had a time stamp. She had a receipt. She knows she went to Publix, went shopping, and checked out. So when did she see David? Earlier in the day, and it was closer to 10:30 or 11. Woodyard says that the phone tracked steps and the phone didn't move, so therefore Shanti didn't move. And how do they build that case? Because they go about presenting a handful of witnesses saying Shanti's a really strong businesswoman, attention to detail, prompt answering calls. This is her thing. This is how she does it. Okay, believe me, 100%. But that's not 100% of the time, ladies and gentlemen. There are exceptions. People have off days, and there are times when we are not willing to answer a work call, especially when it's not urgent, right? Just a text message with a question about a fee. So, if one has a broken tooth and one who's experienced dental pain could be excruciating. You know, like someone stabbing you in the face every time your heart beats with an ice pick. You know, that's the kind of pain you're talking about. Kidney stones, childbirth, tooth pain. You know, that's it. There's no evidence because they didn't submit anything through the medical examiner, not because she was certainly tested. Toxicology reports. What do people do when they're in pain? They take pain meds. What do pain meds do when people are on empty stomach? Because we have no evidence as to the contents of her stomach. We have no evidence of the contents of her blood. So if you want an explanation as to why somebody is going and falling asleep and not answering their phone, if you want an explanation why someone might take a slip and a fall in the shower, there you have it. It's a reasonable explanation. We know the tooth is broken. We know she had an emergency appointment. We know she didn't make it. So which is it, ladies and gentlemen? Is it the 11:30 stop time of the phone? Is that the time of death? Or is it before 6:58? Because there's no way she wouldn't have Apple phone, by the way, text message. I can see it. I can read it. Put it back down. 2018, that's not registering a step. And that would be safe. So, where does it leave us? It leaves us with the other witnesses. It leaves us with Samantha Adams. It leaves us with Lori. It leaves us with these other folks that come in and say, I was around enough. I never saw anything. Lori hung out with David and her husband together. They went to dinners. They hung out together. They went to a concert on New Year's Day. This is in 2018, really close in time. No suggestion whatsoever there was a problem in January. They hung out in 2017 during the hellish renovation time, right? And still no trouble. No cause for concern. But the ring, because Lori's seen the ring. When Shanti got engaged, that she ran around, she showed it off to everybody, and she posted on Facebook. That's what everyone recalls. Well, so what? Who wouldn't expect such a thing? It's a joyous occasion. It's a beautiful ring. You're happy. Wearing a ring, by the way, is a sign of a happy marriage. But none of these people also were privy to the morning routine, to the evening routine, to the shower routine. No one was in there for that. And no one knows where this ring was on that day. And David sure as heck didn't say that he knew for sure that when he saw her that the ring was on her finger. So it's a bit crazy for both the prosecutor and the lead detective to stand up here before you and suggest that he pried the ring off her cold, dead finger. And that's what he plans to prove to you through the evidence. No injury to the finger. No evidence that he stole the ring. He didn't destroy the ring. He sure as heck didn't need the money. The ring was worth $10,000 to $12,000. So what is the point? What is this supposed to suggest? He even sit in the interview and say, her ring was missing. She must have been robbed. He must have been burgled. No. He didn't offer up any explanation to try to deflect or to point them away. And because they said it couldn't be a fault, they put together a false choice, right? If it wasn't an accident, then you had to have killed her. Which was it? Okay, so you're telling me it wasn't an accident, and it wasn't. I must have killed her. So now you're giving me an opportunity to say, why I killed her? All that time, he sat there and he did not make any admissions or he answered their questions. And because they didn't believe him, and he didn't cry enough, he must be guilty of murder. Well, that's not how it works. The government has the burden of proving, beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, that David Tronnes committed this murder. If you believe it's a murder, if you believe that they proved that it's a murder. Because when you go to the point of the things that they missed and the things that the ME couldn't tell you certainly, it still leaves the possibility that this was a fall. And it isn't a forced doubt. It isn't an imaginary. Reasonable doubt instruction. Let's go over it right now because it's. Speak of a reasonable doubt is not a mere doubt, a speculative, imaginary, forced doubt, but if in considering, comparing, and weighing all the evidence, there's not an abiding conviction of guilt, or if having a conviction, it is one is not stable, one with which wavers and vacillates, then the charge is not proved beyond every reasonable doubt, and you must find the defendant not guilty because the doubt is reasonable. So what is that talking about here? You talk about stable or wavers and vacillates. The state puts forth circumstantial evidence. Certainly, you can sustain a conviction on competent circumstantial evidence. I won't stand up here and suggest that you can't. But you are not here to play detective, like we talked about. You're here to determine if they've proven their case. So you can make reasonable inferences from the evidence, connect the dots, so to speak, right? What you can't do is take these leaps from dot to dot. Because they're asking you to make assumptions that are not reasonable. They're asking you to adopt these unreasonable assumptions and consider them to be evidence beyond the exclusion of reasonable doubt. Well, if you picture the floor and the foundation where the pylons are so far apart and it's not stable because the waves are vacillating, that's the idea of this. There's too many gaps, too many leaps that you as a juror would have to take in order to consider this evidence beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. And that's why, in going back there to deliberate and considering the evidence, that they've fallen woefully short. If you look at the rush to judgment, the investigation and stuff, the things that they missed, they pick up sheets. There's a leaf in the sheets. There's a leaf. What do they do? They throw it out. They take the leaf, they take a look to see if it's native to the property. They examine it to try to figure out, could this have come from somewhere else? It's on the sheets, it's relevant to the case. No, they disregard it. Why? Because they had their man. They had their man. 24th, the 30th of April, the 24th of May, August the 29th, they come to the house at his mom's where he's now living, and they find the ring that's not missing. The aha moment. We found what we've been looking for 127 days. Well, with all due respect, you were looking for sheets and you got pictures of them. You were looking for slats, you got pictures of them. They didn't collect any of those things either. We don't even have pictures of these rings. So we're really supposed to trust the fact that they had them and that they documented them the way they said, or there's some confusion, because there was no continuity in this investigation either, right? Because OPD has this policy like, tag, you're it. Forget about the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing. Because instead of waiting for CSI Crosby to come back with Taylor, they rush out to the scene with another CSI cat, Monroe, right? And she doesn't connect the dots because she doesn't test the lead, she doesn't do anything like that. She goes about her business. It's the lack of care. Dr. Utz, consummate professional. I mean, he gets up there, he delivers the evidence. He didn't stretch anything. He tells you that maybe the scrapes were post-mortem, that they could have occurred after the fact. He describes the light rigor, how rigor would have gone, setting, passing on the examination. That's how he figures conduct. Certainly, that wasn't considered by his other officers when they come up with this theory that she's slain or attacked or whatever. Because it doesn't fit the evidence.
this is all just trying to force a timeline because they need to be able to put the time of death at a time when they know David's in the home because they know he's outside the home at other times, and there is a reasonable explanation. And somebody else came into the property. Somebody else did this.
And while he ruled homicide and the cause and strangulation and blunt force trauma, what he couldn't testify was to who? Who done it? That was left to Detective Sprague. Detective Sprague had all the answers on April the 24th. So, where's the smoking gun? His explanation doesn't make sense about what he saw, how he saw her when he walks into the bathroom on the worst day of his life. That he doesn't account for the exact proper position or he clarifies things about that, or there's not enough water on the floor. Watch the interview again. He certainly says that water did not splash on the floor. In the explanation, come up the stairs, your water trickling to a wall, you go around the corner, and one is encountered through a small doorway, an unconscious spouse hunched over the edge of the bathtub, head down to the bottom of the tub, water's running full speed, he turns the water, and what does the tub look like? Look at the pictures, because what he describes is seeing rose-tinged water, right? He picks up his wife, her hair's wet, her shirt's wet, her shorts wet. Makes sense? Is he really sitting there examining this with such care, just like he's walking around all day long looking at his watch so he can get accurate timestamps, just in case later on he's going to count for everything minute by minute? Because that's what happened here. You ask questions to somebody who doesn't have the answers, and then you make false assumptions based upon the answers given. Once again, we're back to confirmational bias. The husband did it, his explanation doesn't make any sense. Except that it did. All the stuff did make sense. Why he was sleeping in a separate room. That he did have money. That the show was going to be taking things over. Everything was looking up. All of that they shared was good. But because he walked around in places where the cameras didn't work, that's on him. We know this is his routine. Being weird and being awkward is not a crime. Being socially retarded is not a crime. Being awkwardly emotional is not a crime. What's wrong is drawing these dangerous conclusions from it when it's not supported by the rest of the evidence. Because if the strongest piece of your case is that he's not crying enough and there's not enough water on the floor, then that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's why they needed 3 search warrants, plus another. It's why, to this point, they don't know where it happened, how it happened, why it happened. That's why. That's the reasonable doubt. Because the evidence doesn't rise to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, except for the fact of proving up that she is dead and she was shot. If you believe it's a homicide, take a look at the second-degree murder instruction or the elements of it, and the ill will, hatred, and lack. Some of that's important. But element number 2 of second-degree murder, element number 2 of manslaughter, so they have to prove that it was David. All of them require that as a separate element. So unless they can check that box on any defense, it's a straight not guilty, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a tragedy. You've got a little boy sitting in the courtroom, lost his mother, he's sitting there throughout the trial. I know you're aware of it. I know some people pay careful attention to Mr. Tronnes, looking for certain things. I don't know what you're looking for, but trials are not about emotion. They're about evidence. You can't prejudge him if you didn't say you're crying to your liking, just like they shouldn't have prejudged him because he didn't cry to their liking. Go back, read the evidence packet, look at the laws the judge gives out to you, review the reasonable doubt instruction, review the weighing the evidence instruction, and think about how Teresa Sprague presented herself in this courtroom. And think about how she steered this ship. And one way, blinders on the whole time.
Question judgment, confirmation of bias, sloppy investigation, lacking evidence, lacking an abiding conviction of guilt. Considering the interview, let's do this instruction, please. We're about to watch a recorded interview that contains opinions and statements by Detective Teresa Sprague, and Detective Barbara Sharp, and David Tronnes. These opinions and statements are pertinent only to explain the reactions and responses they elicit. You are not to consider these opinions and statements by the police as true, but only to establish the context of David Tronnes' reactions and responses. Likewise, statement claimed to have been made by the defendant outside the court and has been placed before you. This was a statement made by David Tronnes, not claimed. It's all the video for yourself. Such a statement should always be considered with caution and be weighed with great care to make certain it was freely and voluntarily made. Therefore, you must determine from the evidence that the defendant's alleged statement was knowingly, voluntarily, and freely made. So when the questions were asked in the manner they were the answers actually statements of fact, or were they truly just guesses based upon the questions that the officers were asking? And that's my point. When they asked, what do you think happened? What would you guess? You can't then just marry into it and consider it to be, a BS story. And he had all this time to come up with, and that's the best you can come up with. Well, you better come up with something better, because people are going to think you're not caring, you're not remorseful, and they're going to come after you for first-degree murder. In making this determination, you should consider the total circumstances. How many hours he was at the station, what he was wearing, what he was eating, what he was drinking, the stress that he was under, the trauma that he was under. To explain some of the confusion, really, whether when making the statement, when the defendant made the statement, he had been threatened in order to get him to make it, and whether anyone had promised him anything in order to get him there. Conclude the defendant's adequate statement was not freely and voluntarily made, we should disregard it. It was certainly voluntarily made. The question is, are ultimately the individual statements a result of a free and voluntary interview, or is it the manipulation? They are so adequately trained to employ an investigation techniques. The government's the one spinning here. The government's the one taking the insignificant and stacking them into a pyramid of inferences and asking you to make the same assumptions. The jury is bound by the law that the judge is going to give you, and I'm confident that after carefully deliberating and reviewing the law and spiritedly deliberating on the facts, listening to each other, a spirited exchange of ideas, that you'll come back and return the only just verdict in this case, and that's a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.